All right, welcome everybody. My name is Michelle Walker. I am in McMinnville, Oregon. I've been very active in the open schools effort in the state as well as nationally. And as we all know, this last year or two has been one of the most trying that we've all experienced probably in our entire lifetime. That being said, we know that the gubernatorial race and everything coming up is very important, and a lot of people really want to know what's going on and what these candidates stand for. So we've invited Mayor Stan Pulliam from Sandy, Oregon. And with me, I have Glenda from Unheard Parents, and I have Matt, also known as Oregon Hunter, off of Twitter. And we're going to be asking him some questions. All right, Stan.
All right.
You're up.
I'm up. So how do you want to work this? Do you want a little spiel about me, or do you jump right into the question?
Just introduce yourself a little bit. We want to give you a time to just kind of shine for a minute here and just tell us all about yourself.
All right. Well, I don't know about all about me, but my name's Stan Pulliam. I'm the mayor of Sandy. Sandy's my hometown. And so it really my story, my efforts in the governor's race really begin there. You know, I was asked by Rhea, who owns a local restaurant here in town, Sandy Family Restaurant, for an audience with her. During the second round of shutdowns. There's too many shutdowns to count anymore. And I go in there, and wouldn't you know it, Rhea had filled the entire restaurant with my Main Street business owners. And with the Sandy being my hometown, when I look these folks in the eye, these were people that I'd grown up with. These were classmates of mine that I went to school with. A lot of them had kids that go to school with mine and Mackenzie's kids, Lucy and Olivia. And so when I looked them in the eye, these people were people that I knew, and I saw desperation and fear. And it really started our New Year's Day movement, a lot of our advocacy efforts, to really support our Main Street small businesses. And a lot of this, I feel, is because my wife, Mackenzie, and I have kind of stood at this crossroads of just really, what Michelle mentioned earlier, just the craziness of the last 2 years. As somebody who serves as mayor of my hometown, I mentioned I'm really involved with our small business owners, and I know those folks, and I feel really, firsthand what was going on. I mentioned that Mackenzie and I have 2 kids, and Lucy and Olivia, that are ages 11 and 8, that are in school. And so we, as 2 working people, dual working household, middle class, with kids, we went through the full virtual and the hybrid and saw the ramifications on our kids. And my wife, Mackenzie, she stood up and helped form the Oregon Moms Union that's been fighting back a lot against a lot of these mandates and these school restrictions to really get our kids, back in school. And so that's what this is really about. As someone who grew up, I mentioned Sandy, but in Oregon, I talk a lot about what Portland used to be. And, Portland was always left, and it was always a little bit weird. But as someone who grew up here, I remember going to Saturday markets and stuff, and it was weird, and there was a lot of people watching, but it wasn't dangerous. And now it's dangerous. And you think about the mass homelessness on the streets of not just Portland, but of Eugene, and it's out in all of our communities. It's now truly a statewide problem. More people were murdered on the streets of Portland and in Oregon last year in 2021 than at any time in our state's history. The defund the police movement has really been having an impact on this state. The decriminalization of hard drugs have allowed the cartels to come over from Mexico and really fill that vacuum. It's time for strong leadership. It's time for leadership that's going to stand up and support our police. It's time for leadership that's going to stand up for our individual rights and liberties. I solidly stand with medical freedom and against these mandates and the rights for individuals to choose how we want to take on our own medical decisions in the privacy of our own homes and with our own families. And that's what this race is about. It's about individual freedom and decision making. It's about really returning Oregon and restoring to what we once were. And this is the time to do it because people's lights have been turned on. They understand, their eyes are open. They know where the power centers are with the government teacher unions and in the extreme left. And now's the time to act. So I look forward to your questions. I'd love to, get more specific with anything you'd like to ask. But, thank you for taking time out of your Friday evening to ask questions and hear what, candidates have to say, because this is the most crucial time in our state's history. And, right now we're in the primary season. Soon we'll be in general election season. And when we're in general election season, we have to come together and pick a candidate because we truly have to get this state back on track. So thank you again. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Stan. I think we can all agree you could not be more right. Now is the time to come together and unite and just kind of really agree on who we want to run this state and help us get it back to its former glory.
Thank you.
So with that said, I'm going to bring over Matt. He has his first question for you.
Well, thank you. Well, we do have one question before we dive into some, specifics about economy and budget and that sort of thing. And one of the questions that some of our friends and colleagues submitted was, if you were sworn in today, what would be your first official act as governor?
Well, my first official act would be to wipe clean any of the fines that were put down on these local Main Street businesses, to return any of the money that was collected from it, and to end all the mandates. And so I apologize that I went to "and" on you when you asked for the very first, but really it's the returning the money, but really enacted all these COVID-19 restrictions and mandates, and really starting to wipe the slate clean on those. Thank you for your question.
No, very welcome. Fair enough. Well, it's we don't want everything to be all COVID. I'm sure we've all talked.
I'm ready. I'm ready for the next issue.
till we're blue in the face. So for this biennium, the budget is about 31% higher than the previous budget in the biennium, if my math is correct. So this year it's this biennium, it's $112 billion. Are you planning on working with the legislature to live within their means to fix the various state issues? Or do you plan on raising taxes? And along those lines, what areas of government do you think can be streamlined, reduced, or reallocated to free up some of the funding and resources necessary to solve a lot of the problems we have in the state?
Yeah, I mean, great question. So first, no new taxes. I believe government needs to stay within their means. You talk about, the growth of government, and imagine how much more government would have grown if we didn't have the kicker enacted. And we have lawmakers that every single cycle are trying to get rid of our kicker, return. And people forget what the kicker is after they've collected our money and allocated and spent their budget, they have to give the excess of our money back to us. And could you imagine how much the state government budget would have grown if we did not have that enacted for all of these years previous to now, and how much more it will grow if they are successful in getting rid of the kicker. So we need to be able to get rid of that. The other is we have all these restricted funds that go into all these different areas. And I'll tell you, as a mayor, I'm used to having to deal with some of these restricted funds, and it can be incredibly frustrating because what you end up with is funds that have really healthy budgets and a ton of money in them, right? Then you have other funds that don't have a lot of money and maybe have been neglected over years. But maybe the funds that don't have the money in it are your higher priorities. And yet, as elected leaders, you're not able to set those priorities and allocate those funds. Instead, you're told that you're not able to touch these funds over here. So instead, they're trying to raise taxes to fill the coffers over here instead of really sufficient, succinct, budgeting. That's really where we need to get to. And then in addition to that, I talk a lot about, homelessness and picking up, some of these services for our more vulnerable communities. Back in the day, it used to be families that would pick up the need for our vulnerable. And if a family wasn't able to do that, it would be your faith-based community. And you got nonprofit organizations. And that's what we need to get back to. Do you know that nonprofit organizations in Portland's the #1 employer group? #1! All these nonprofits feeding into these services and stuff to help out, with the homelessness. And yet we have government growing more and more. We've got the Metro bond stuff that's passing all the time for homelessness. What we really need to do is to distinctly look at how we're going to address our homelessness issue and just stop throwing hand over fist of money at it. We definitely need to rein in government spending. Thank you for that question.
As a quick follow-up, I mean, obviously you're not governor yet, but having been, in government now, and obviously I'm sure interface with much of the state branches of government. Do you have are there any areas you would maybe look at more in particular than others for maybe trying to streamline or reduce or see if they're, to your point, really even a necessity?
Well, you got to, when you look at the budget, you have a couple of items that take up enormous factors of that budget, right? One is you have PERS, which we absolutely have to rein in. You've got the education budget, which makes up a significant portion of the budget. And there is certainly fat that we can cut out of the education budget. We need to get towards school choice and where the money follows, the child. And we need to be able to get it out of going towards benefits and stuff to teachers and actually get it into the classroom. So I would say education is a major factor. We spend a lot of time trying to get into these small little areas of the budget, and they do that, quite frankly, at the national level as well. And what we need to be focusing on are these larger portions of the budget. And people, they don't want to take on the political capital of saying, we need to look at not spending as much money towards education. Instead, what we want to do is say, I just want to spend more money than the next guy, right? Oh, I'll spend more money. No, I'll spend more money. And the truth is we're never going to spend more money than the Democrats. And I think about even Republicans in the state house and the state legislature this last time. They're like, our budget would have put more money into the education system than the Democrats. Well, thanks a lot. We're already in the top half in the country in what we spend towards education, and yet we're ranked nearly last in every statistical category, from graduation rates to overall education. Money's not the issue. And so if you ever hear any House Republican or any Republican saying, yeah, let's get more money to throw at a problem that's not getting fixed with more money, you really need to dive deep and ask additional questions. But we totally have to. I'm very passionate about it, as I'm sure you can tell. We need to rein in government spending.
No, fair enough. I appreciate that. So more economically related than budget related. But recently, Oregon ranked 35th in a CNBC survey of most friendly states to do business in. And what will you do? What do you intend to do to make Oregon friendlier for business and to bring corporations and manufacturers back to the state and reinvigorate the economy?
Yeah, thank you. So, we talk a lot, you mentioned, COVID-19, let's get additional questions to that, because that's right. A lot of the times we look at the business and economic factors here in Oregon. We want to say, look at these mandates and these shutdowns. And that's huge. That's enormous. But it's not like our economic sector was thriving previous to COVID-19. It's not like Oregon was the easiest place to do business as a small business owner previous to COVID-19. You mentioned manufacturing. Think about the gross receipts tax that just came down and the pyramiding that goes on there and the additional costs and how hard it is to do business. Think about wage and hour requirements and the rules and administrative red tape that comes down from all our different agencies here in the state. And so I liked President Trump's philosophy when he said, for every new government regulation, you've got to cut 2 additional ones. Absolutely. We need to be cutting government red tape. So yeah, I mean, that would be a big way I'd address it.
Okay. All right. One more kind of, a little bit back to both, more to budget. So Oregon state government has been awash in mismanagement and waste, and in some instances even fraud, totaling over $1 billion, in the last decade. That's without even looking at the inefficiencies and redundancies. So what will you do to essentially, correct that lack of oversight? How will you bring accountability and efficiency back to government?
Yeah, so we have 40 years of just about complete Democrat control, from the governor's office to the state legislature to Multnomah County to Metro to Portland city government, which means we have institutional, over the course of many decades of hiring, bureaucracy from the extreme left wing. I'm so sorry. I lost track of your question. Can you ask the question again?
Quite all right. Basically, given Oregon's history of, we have many mismanaged projects, whether it's Cover Oregon, Columbia River Crossing, the employment computer system, and there seems to be zero accountability.
Yes, I apologize. Yeah, I remember exactly where you're going there. So you talk about
how are we going to make everybody more accountable?
Yeah, so you talk about Cover Oregon. You talk about a lot of these initiatives that we're really looking at where we were spending a lot of money in new technology. We can't even get unemployment checks to people through the old computer system that we have in the state employment offices. The way we do it is previous to all of this, we had recommendations from the private sector, from audits through the Secretary of State's office on recommendations on how to fix these issues on the front end. My buddy was a state representative, Patrick Sheehan. was on the committee calling out the Cover Oregon disaster from the get-go, because he was uniquely sitting with a background of technology experience and everything else, and he knew exactly what was going on, up front. And so that's how you fix it, is by bringing in business leaders, by bringing in good government audits, and really discovering these things on the front end instead of just the institutional bureaucrats just pushing it through the system without transparency.
Okay. That's all I have for the moment. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Hey, Stan, my question is coming up next. This is under the category of livability. And what I'm wondering is, what are your plans for dealing with our homeless crisis, and what can be done about the just mass graffiti and unsanitary dump sites? I live in Gladstone, and I drive up 205, and just within the last 7 or 8 years, it's just exploded in tents and garbage and just a mess. And it's not a way for anyone to live. And so it's sad to me as an Oregonian to see that. So I want to know what your thoughts are of how to address that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very important question on homelessness. So I just wrote a column with the Oregon Way that came out this week. I found it interesting because there's about 4 other elected officials, state leaders that had, kind of their ideas on how to fix the homelessness issue, that their column's right next to mine. And I mentioned that because, they all said the same stuff that you hear all the time from politicians, right? We need to have wraparound services. We need to find additional housing to really help these people out. Mine said, I agree. There's a lot of people that need help. There are people that are really out in their bad way. There are mental health issues. There are severe addiction issues. That's what everybody talks about. But you know what nobody spends enough time talking about? The criminals living on our streets, the criminals who are creating crime on a daily basis, the criminals who are indiscriminately dumping trash, not cleaning up after themselves, that are doing petty crime on a nightly basis, that are doing open drug use, that have no interest in helping themselves. And at the very beginning of this campaign, we said we were going to have a 3-prong approach to homelessness. We are going to provide help to those who wanted it, be firm with those who didn't, and provide safe communities for everybody to live. And so everybody wants to focus on helping the people who want it, and we need to do that. And I mentioned the nonprofit organizations, the faith-based organizations. I mentioned the Metro Housing Bill. There's all kinds of money and financial resources going into that group. But the other group, the criminals, we're not picking up the trash. We're not funding the police. You know that our police officers in the 1970s, we had over 35 police officers per 100,000 people. Do you know what that number is today? It's 8. It's 8. And then we wonder why we have the mass homelessness and the crime and everything else that we have. And so in that same column, a proposal that I put forward is, and really we got the idea after doing a tour around the 1,000 acres state park there along the Columbia Gorge. You walk through what was once a pristine and beautiful scenic, Oregon recreational area. Now it's an enclave of homelessness. It looks like a housing development. There's cut down trees. It will take millions of dollars of investment to return that area, to the environmentally, scenic, beautiful area that it once was. That should be illegal. That should be illegal. And, we talk about these alternative sites that you have to place homelessness. If you're going to move them out of your downtown core, the Ninth Circuit has a decision that says that you have to offer an alternative location. And so what we're proposing is that alternative location be on Port of Portland property, and that the Port of Portland, they have their own police, and that they enforce their rules and laws on that property. And if you're breaking rules and laws, you should go to prison, and there should be consequences for your actions. And I'll kind of close the answer with this. A lot of it's about leadership. You think about the southern border right now. I like to say that we'll clean up our homelessness issue here in Oregon about as fast as President Trump fixed the border, and about as quickly as President Biden screwed the entire thing up. And that's because under one president, there was leadership that said what was acceptable and what was unacceptable. And the truth is people living in tent cities, in abandoned parking lots, self-medicating their mental health illnesses with heroin, that's not compassionate. It's not compassion by any definition of the word. And so we need to address these issues head on. We need to be realistic about it. We need to not be afraid to talk about what's really happening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Switching now to education. In 2012, the state law eliminated the executive elected office of superintendent of schools that had been part of our Constitution since 1872. Would you support bringing back an elected state superintendent of schools? And if so, why or why not?
So I haven't made a decision yet on whether I'd want to bring back superintendent of public instruction to be elected or not. I have made a decision that I would fire myself as the superintendent of public instruction, because the governor should not be the superintendent of public instruction. Now, the reason why I said that I'm not sure whether or not I'd want it to be an elected position is I haven't come to the determination whether or not it should even be a position. It should be up to locally elected school boards and parents to make the decisions locally at a local level about the curriculum and the educational options of their kids. And more localized than that, we need to get to a school choice system in which money follows the children, in which homeschool parents, in which faith-based families, charter school families like Mackenzie and I, all different people who want different choice in their kids' lives. That's where we need to get into our educational system at the most localized, marketplace approach that we can. And that's simply not at a state centralized system. So, I would remove myself out of the equation. I still need to do a little bit more thought and think on how I'd want to handle the superintendent position as far electorally, but really my goal is to get it more at the localized level and power into the hands of parents.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one more question about education. Currently, 65% of all U.S. fourth graders scored below proficient in reading, which means that there are only 35% of fourth graders who are at reading level, grade level or above. And that's, Oregon is no exception in that. Our current graduation rate is below the national average. What do you see as the governor's role in improving Oregon's graduation rate?
Yeah, so I view the governor's role is to work with parents to make sure that they have the best educational opportunities for their children in front of them as possible, to make sure that we have the right amount of finances allocated per individual student so that they have the opportunity to go to the right school that fits their individual needs. But an example I'll give is so I mention all the time, we have our two little girls and they go to a local charter school. And the truth is that my oldest one is the perfect school for her. I mean, she thrives in it. You know, it's just the curriculum and everything else. It matches up great for her. My younger one, maybe not. But right down the road, we have a private school that just started up during COVID-19 that invokes equestrian into their learning, and they have farm to table. And man, is Olivia into this stuff, right? And Mackenzie and I, we're a middle class family, so we can't afford the tuition, for that school. But it would sure ignite my daughter, in her learning and her ability to be able to, succeed in life and everything else. So we're trying to figure out some of that stuff in our household, but we shouldn't have to. The truth is that we should have school choice, and as parents, we should have the ability, to choose, the educational opportunities that meet our children's need. And we talk a lot about choice, but I don't think we talk enough about customized learning. That's really what school choice allows us to do. Is, you think about when COVID-19 popped up and these school closures, you started seeing these learning pods and all these things popping up, and parents started seeing these different environments that worked best for their individual child. And imagine where that's our future. Imagine where you're sitting in your community and you're choosing among different learning pods, charter schools, faith-based schools, homeschooling, online schooling. Because here's the thing, people coming out the last 2 years are going, man, I don't like this online schooling. Some are saying, my child was awesome in online schooling. Well, that's not up for us to choose what other people's kids should be doing. That should be up to those individual parents and what's right for those individual kids. So to answer your question, my role as governor, to make sure that we have the best graduation rates and the best learning in the future is to make sure that each individual child, in consultation with their parents and their family, have the ability to choose among the best educational options for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Michelle,
Thank
you're up
you.
next.
Thank you, Stan. I have a couple questions about education myself. We've all seen and kind of heard what's going around in the state and nationally in terms of the unions and all the other things that are happening involving education. How do you feel the unions should be participating in the state of Oregon for teachers?
Well, they should be participating. They shouldn't be ruling. They're ruling. They're calling all the shots. We're talking about. There's hidden gems, in all of this. One is that parents were able to see what their kids were being taught in these schools, mm-hmm. right? And with critical race theory and everything else through this virtual learning. But another thing that happened over the last 2 years, as parents' eyes were open as to where the power centers are in this state. And that was not any more apparent than we're told that seniors are among the most vulnerable to COVID-19. Then the vaccine rollout comes and teachers scoot right in front of the line to go get the vaccine. And then after they get it, they have the audacity to advocate not to let the kids back into school. And so they are absolutely ruling what is going on. In fact, I would say even yesterday on the Democrat side, where you saw this Nick Kristof, Shemia Fagan said he couldn't run. And then less than an hour later, Tina Kotek has a press release saying she's going to resign from the speakership to overshadow that story. If you guys don't think that's not the public employee, government unions, teacher unions in the background, pulling the puppet strings on these people, you're absolutely kidding yourselves. So what are we going to do about it? I was at a town hall. I think it was my second one after announcing my exploratory committee. And I had this firefighter raise his hand and he said, Mayor, you should know this. When you can't come to an agreement with your firefighter or your police union, what happens? Well, we go to collective bargaining. We go to a mutual arbitrator, right? A mutual arbitrator. They're not allowed to strike. Why are they not allowed to strike? Because they're an essential service, and so are our children. And so I say that to say that teachers should not be allowed to strike either. We need to allow our kids into school. We need to bring on these government teacher unions and take the power out of their hands. The Janus decision does that allows a lot of these teachers to opt out. But we really need to hold them in check. Now, I'm for union representation. I think people have the right to belong to those things, right? But they do not have the right to be pulling the strings and calling all the shots, and we need to do our part.
I would 1,000% agree with that, but we can talk about that another time. Yeah. You brought up critical race theory, and so if there's critical race theory, I know that that's a kind of an umbrella term.
Yes.
Anti-racism, social emotional learning, the comprehensive sex education. How do you plan to address the concerns for all parties on both sides, or any side for that matter?
So first things first, on day one, we would look to sign an executive order that would ban critical race theory from our schools. Okay. Now, what did we learn about executive orders, in the last two presidencies? We learned a little bit that they can be fool's gold, right? A lot of us are celebrating when President Trump does his executive orders, and then we're all crying ourselves to sleep when Joe Biden goes in there, and he signs all his executive orders, getting rid of them. And so what we need to do is pass laws that are long lasting, so they're not just subject to who the next governor is. Now, I talk a lot about school choice. And that's because I really do believe that's the unifying factor for all of us as Oregonians. Because I don't know about you guys, but the only times I really start to get upset is when people tell me what I have to do. And when we get to individual decision-making and determination, that should really unify us. Now, I give that answer to critical race theory because if we have real school choice, if we have real marketplace principles where schools are having to develop niche curriculum and having to appeal to different population segments, to appeal to children to go and get their education done at their institution, well, guess what? People are going to be able to choose to enroll their kids in schools that have critical race theory type curriculum. Parents are going to be able to choose to send their kids to school that do not have that kind of curriculum. I'm one that's going to be sending my kids to schools that do not have that kind of curriculum. But here's the deal. We live in a free country. Supposed to be people came to this country because they wanted to flee all the nonsense of being told what to do and the oppression and everything else going on in foreign lands. And so what we need to get to here, especially in our education system, is parents and students picking the best educational opportunities for them. If they want that kind of curriculum in their schools, that's the kind of decision that they make. It's the same reason why you can't see it, but I'm watching Fox News and not CNN, right? I make that decision for myself. And parents have the right, along with their children, to make the right curriculum decisions. And that's how I think we can really start to alleviate some of these school issues in the long run that divide us so much, is by just simply allowing us to choose for ourselves.
I think Glenda had a follow-up question.
I'm going to go ahead and hold that bonus question and go to building bridges. Question number 8 for you, Michelle.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we have enough time.
Well, I don't know how to physically build bridges. I'll just start.
Oh, okay.
Come on. We just want another one. Just one more, please.
Yeah.
City of bridges over there, right? So this is about building bridges. And again, this goes back to politics. Again, it's so tense. It's almost, you can almost cut it with a knife, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and to be completely honest with you, Stan, I'm a registered Democrat of 20 years. Mm-hmm. Glenda, and I'm not going to out any of them, but there's a very diverse crowd here. And we're all able to have a conversation perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of animosity. And I'm just curious, as you campaign, what about your campaign, as well as your approach to governing, will appeal to the broad base of constituents, including the Democrats, the Independents, as well as Republicans?
Yeah. I said that a little bit in the previous answer, I think, and that's just the libertarian in me, the person that wants people to live their own lives in the way that they see fit. And we all live in our own individual homes with our own individual families. And I want people to be able to make the best life decisions for them individually. And to me, that individualism is a true unifying factor. Because there's not anybody trying to tell anybody else how they should believe or what they should do. We're able to make those own decisions for ourselves. I think the fact that I've been a mayor is incredibly helpful. I've been a nonpartisan mayor. We have Democrats, we have Republicans in our city council, we have non-affiliated, we have seniors, we have parents, we have men, we have women, we have all walks of life. But you know how we tackle the issues? As neighbors. And when the COVID-19 stuff first started, I was very outspoken, as everybody knows. And we had a few counselors that were going, "Oh, Mayor, you're getting, pretty far out in front of us." And the way we handled that is we had a community discussion. We had our local business owners, our local athletic club owners, our local restaurant owners, our their employees. We had parents show up, and all of a sudden, when you're hearing about how these closures and mandates impact your neighbors, the people you dine with, the people down the road, well, now you're starting to see the world in a completely different way. And that's how I look to handle these issues, is to talk to people like people, not as Republicans, not as Democrats, but as Oregonians who all have the ability to make the decisions for ourselves. And I'll just kind of close out the answer with kind of a silly story. And that is, believe it or not, I'm the guy that's responsible for legalizing professional wrestling in the state of Oregon. And I tell that because some may remember in the 90s and stuff, it was actually illegal to have professional wrestling in Oregon. One of those oddities that were going on. And I was working in the state legislature, and I was having dinner with a couple of representatives and senators. We were talking about it. It was on the TV. And so you guys are empowered enough to do this. If you guys want to do this, that's why you're elected. You can change the laws. You can do stuff like that. Well, I tell this story because we ended up with over 36 co-sponsors, equal size of both parties, Republicans and Democrats, both on the House side and the Senate side. I remember hearing Deborah Kafori yielding her time to Tootie the Rock Smith. I mean, think about it. Deborah Kafori, Tootie Smith. We had a great time. We were having fun. We were talking as individuals, as people. I'm sure we disagree on a significant amount of issues, but we got to know each other. And I say all that to say is I got over 36 co-sponsors on that bill. That meant that I knew over 36 Republicans and Democrats enough that trusted me enough to sign on to that. That's the kind of leader I am, and I have my convictions. Anyone who goes to my social media knows that, I'm pretty straightforward with my feelings and my beliefs. But as you mentioned, Michelle, how you all get along, right? At the end of the day, we're all people, and we don't have to be disagreeable, just because we don't necessarily see eye to eye on an issue. At the same time, we need to have our convictions, and we need to explain those, and we need to stand by those. But we don't need to treat each other as the enemy. And that's how I would lead.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that last word there was perfect. We don't need to be enemies. We can all get along.
That's right.
Linda?
I think you've addressed this previously, but I'll just throw it out there. And if there's anything specifically that you want to add, you are free to do that. How influential do you feel you are with people?
Oh, very much so. In fact, I would say if we went through the last 3 years of our Sandy City Council agenda, there's not a single item on my agenda that I was trying to push through that I was not successful in doing that. And you got to remember, I took on a 4-term incumbent mayor. And so when I came on to the city council, these were a bunch of city councilors and stuff they all endorsed my opponent, the person against me. But what I did is I sat down individually for coffee and lunch with each individual councilor. I asked them why they ran for council. What were their passions? What is it that makes you volunteer? None of us are paid. What is it you're trying to accomplish? Why are you taking time away from your family and friends and things that are probably more fun to do than this? There's got to be something that you're really passionate about. And when you hear people and you hear the motives behind why they are doing what they're doing and what they want to do, you find commonality. You totally find commonality. And that is how I am influential with people. I figure out what their passions are, what their motives and beliefs are behind what they're doing. And I look for the commonality and the ways that we can agree. President Reagan had a quote that he would always say that someone who agrees with me 70% of the time, they're not my enemy, they're my friend. And I try to engage in every conversation with colleagues and elected leaders in that fashion. Quite honestly, when I engage with Democrats, my state representative's a Democrat. When we meet, I try to start the agenda and focus on the items that we can come to agreement on first, because those are the things we can accomplish, right? And then you get to your disagreements. Now, my dad's a truck driver. I was with Timber Unity. I sat in her office during cap and trade. We had a conversation, right? But you got to start the conversation where you can agree and be most effective and get things done. And that's how I try to influence people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Back to the thing that we really we're so tired of hearing about, right? The pandemic.
Yeah.
Favorite subject. How do you feel about the administrative ruling that's currently happening, that they're deciding on in terms of the indoor masking and making it permanent?
Well, we shouldn't have indoor masking right now, period. Long enough making it permanent. So it certainly shouldn't be permanent. It's unbelievable that they're trying to do that. They've been able to extend it and extend it. There's no reason they wouldn't be able to extend it again. They shouldn't extend it. They shouldn't have it, right? We shouldn't have a mask mandate. You talk about the new variant that's going everywhere. I mean, I'm one that tends to believe that this is an extremely good thing, that it has been shown to not put people into the hospital, that, a lot of people call it the endemic. Previous generations, they'd be having their kids in play dates, giving each other the chicken pox and stuff with this stuff. Instead, what we're doing is we're shutting down, making people wear masks. We're talking about additional school closures, ending extracurricular activities and everything else. So sorry for the long answer. I could have just said no, but I'm against that, vaccine passports, mandates, all of it. I think it's ridiculous.
In terms of, and this is just my pure ignorance here, how would you address getting, if you were elected, how would you eliminate that ruling if it were to become permanent? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, so Oregon Health Authority, I think they're the ones that are going through it right now. The best part about being governor is you appoint all those people.
All right.
so yeah, I mean, that is, we don't, it's one of the interesting things about the governorship is, a lot of people we spend a lot of time talking about these issues and laws and different things. You're in the hundreds of appointments that you have to make as the governor, from everything from the ODOT board of directors to the Oregon Health Authority to these port commissions. People go, and then what's funny is after they get elected, they try to pass the buck, right? Oh, that's not me. That's the Oregon Health Authority. Well, you appoint, all those different people, they work for you. So that's how we would appoint new people, people that believe in individual rights and liberties. People that take things seriously. I'm not, everybody has different feelings on, COVID-19, to vaccines and how well they work and everything else. I'm not one that looks to get into those conversations. I'm one that looks to tell people that educate yourself on the facts and then decide for yourselves and your family how you want to proceed.
Thank you. Do you support, so the vaccine record, the digital vaccine record program that they're, putting into place and implementing, do you support that and
No
it
way.
being used to determine somebody's participation, how they can participate in society?
Absolutely not.
And
no way.
No, I was just going to ask, and if you don't, how do you plan to kind of curtail that? Because there's a lot of money being poured into it as we.
Yeah. So just like Governor Ron DeSantis did, I would sign an executive order that would ban vaccine passports and the digital record keeping and everything else. I graduated from the U of O. I've been a Duck football season ticket holder since day one of graduation. I did not go to a single game for the first time this last year because of the vaccine passports. I'm adamantly against it. Haven't been to a Portland Trailblazer game, Portland Timber game. I think it's wrong. I think all these vaccine passports are absolutely wrong that they're doing. It's shocking to me that the same people that are going to call you a racist for insisting on on an ID to vote are the same ones that want to insist on a vaccine passport to go to a Duck game or a grocery store or any of those things. So we would absolutely look to not allow that.
Great, thank you. And I think that pretty much sums up your position on the vaccine mandates.
But the only other thing I would say is I got the earlier question about, all the flaws that happen in government, the unemployment checks and all that. They release vaccination status information for a lot of employees in the state government. These folks cannot be trusted to keep our individual private data. So that's just another reason and a litany of reasons, beyond the constitutional and freedoms and liberties and everything else, why we wouldn't allow it. Yeah.
Well, I think I thank you for bringing that part up, because that's absolutely correct. They can't even keep that safe. What makes you think they can keep our information safe? But there's other programs out there that are apps and free and all. It doesn't make any sense. So, but I think that everything you just said sums up that you are against the vaccine mandates. Then.
Yes.
Okay.
Why we're running? It's not the only reason, but it's what got us in this thing. Absolutely. Yeah.
So can you please share your stance on the lockdowns and as a COVID mitigation strategy? Do you find it effective, not effective? Harmful, not harmful?
Yeah. I've yet to see the science that shows that it was effective. I find it amazing that all of these governors and politicians from states with shutdowns just love Florida these days, where you can go and live and have some individuality. Totally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Matt, you can give a couple of questions about accountability, and then there's a question from somebody watching as well.
So not directly related to COVID, but certainly has arisen because of it. So Oregon system of declaring a state of emergency. So as of right now, the governor basically can declare an unlimited amount of states of emergency. And I don't believe there's a limit on the duration. And there's certainly a number of, powers contained there within. So do you currently agree with that scope of power for the governor to declare a state of emergency?
Well, first, let me say is I don't believe she has that scope of power. I think she's only found to have that scope of power when she appoints the judges who then deem the Constitution under their own reading to allow her to have it. She should be having these executive orders ratified by the state legislature. From our country's founding, we've had checks and balances, and why the legislature is, derelict their duty to do that, we'll have to ask them. That said, I'll tell you, as a mayor, during the last several years of just these crazy times we live in, starts to make you think a bit about these emergency orders, with these different things that have happened. The one thing I've learned is that not all emergencies are the same. You think about wildfire season. I think it probably makes a lot of sense for the power to be concentrated for one individual for a short period of time to have to make very quick decisions on a fast-moving, highly spreading wildfire. But you compare that to the slow burn of a pandemic, like what we are in right now. I mean, maybe remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve. More like 2 years to flatten the curve. But let's think about that for a second. Maybe when you're learning what a virus is and what the pandemic is, maybe you give like a 2-week leeway in a pandemic situation to the governor. But after 2 weeks, they need to be talking to our legislators. They need to be moving these decisions to the county commissions and to the city councils, to the locally elected officials who are the most accountable to the people. And so so it's kind of a two-part answer. One is I don't think she has the power she's been given. That said, I do think we need reform, and I think we need to be thinking about these emergency orders in the vision of a bunch of different scenarios and not just one encompassing emergency. I mean, we've got the Cascadia earthquake that could happen, right? That's a completely different situation than a pandemic. So we need to look at the emergency orders, but with an eye towards always having checks and balances, accountability, and local control.
Okay. So, and you're right. So there used to be a health state of emergency and then a general state of emergency.
Right.
And the health state of emergency had tighter restrictions than the general state of emergency. And then I believe they rewrote those rules, or not the law necessarily, but they changed that after that lawsuit out of Baker City. So will you work with the legislature essentially to reinstate, reasonable restrictions on a health state of emergency?
100%.
Okay. Fair enough.
All right, Matt, you have another question down there?
And continuing.
Really quick, because there was a question on the screen, and I just
there is.
I'll go back to
you want me to read it to you?
Oh, I know it. I'm a mayor. I know this one. That's why I'm excited to answer it. So what it's talking about is Tina Kotek's bill that was signed by the governor to allow multifamily mass housing in the single family lots, and it forces your hand. It doesn't allow your local planning commissions, mayors, and city councilors to make those decisions. So now, the way it used to be, if you had some new big development coming in, or you had an apartment complex or a triplex that wanted to come in to your single family neighborhood, you could appeal to your city councilor, or as my wife Mackenzie likes, when you go to the store, you can be cornered, as mayor by your local neighbor. But that's our democracy, right? That's local control, and that's engagement in the process. What this has done, it's the state government telling our communities how we have to grow, how we have to develop our own communities, where this housing goes, takes out all the power from the hands of your neighbors, of your city councilors, of your mayors, of you. So this is something that really needs to get overturned. It's kind of a wonky issue, but it's not so wonky when it's your neighbor, that's building, this big complex next to your single family house. So thank you so much for that question, Mike.
So I have an add-on question, actually, impromptu, but the way you kind of explain that. So let's say, with that, you have like a quaint little town like Sandy, and the state can pretty much just allow a huge monstrosity to just get plopped right there. I mean, in
That's what's happened.
Okay.
That's what they did. Can you believe it?
Absolutely horrendous. I mean, you have these cute little towns all over Oregon, and that's terrible.
And they're cute because neighbors and locally elected officials and all stuff dreamed and planned that way for generations. Sometimes it was the grandparents and everybody else, and this is what you're left with, this beautiful community. And now they're just trying to say, you know what? And the reason they're doing it is because of their homeless issues, their housing affordability issues. They're taking all their mistakes and their problems, the consequences from their decisions, and making us have to deal with it. And it's horrific. So, all right. You were going to ask me a question. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
That's, you actually touched on quite a bit of it already. So, you talked about Biden and Trump and essentially call it the warring executive orders. But it does seem to be a trend lately from the presidents through governors to essentially legislate by proxy through executive agencies. And it's really frustrating as, a resident because you have no recourse, right? Your local legislator and state senators say, oh, you have recourse, you just vote on the governor next time. Well, that's 4 years later. Right. So if you become governor, essentially, what will be your stance towards issuing executive orders? And will you work with the legislature to change things via the legislative process rather than signing one sheet, executive orders that give you the power?
Yeah, great question. So I'm opposed to executive power and a lot of executive orders. And you heard me use the executive order word a couple of times, right? And if you think about the times that I brought up executive orders and why I would use it is first is constitutional reasons, when like vaccine passports and these closures and the fines that were put on businesses, I think that's against the Constitution. Those are against our freedoms and rights as Americans. So I believe in the executive authority for doing that. The other issue I raised was critical race theory, right? But then I immediately said we've got to try to get a law into place. And I just start there to say that I do think there's a place for executive orders, but not very often. I think what we need to do is get back to regular order. We need to be passing our laws through the legislature, signed by the governor. And if you can't get adequate support, then you need to go make the case to the people to get new elected leaders in, or you can use the referendum and ballot initiative system to get the will of the people. But too often right now, to your point, is we have these dictates from above, and we really need to get away from that.
Okay. And just so you know, if we have time, there is one bonus question concerning a specific executive order, but we'll see if we get to it.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay, I think I'm up next. Many Oregonians feel that unelected bureaucrats, Patrick Allen of Oregon Health Authority, as an example, have been making decisions that should be reserved for elected officials using the legislative process. What is your view on how bureaucrats should be participating in our state? And I think you've touched on this, but want to give you an opportunity to really hit that home.
Well, first, I'm just going to throw a shout out to my wife, Mackenzie, who's in the room with me. Oregon Moms Union actually backed Pat Allen's opponent. He was actually also on the Sherwood School Board there for a while, and parents and organizers organized and booted him right off. So we're very, Pat seems to really like telling others how they need to live their lives. And so that's not the role of government. The role of government should be to bring in the facts and information to adequately explain that to the public. But the most important thing that government needs to do is to listen to the people. We need to empower our neighbors and the people of our state to make the decisions that, rest best for them. And so what we need more importantly is we need new leaders at the very top. That's why I'm running for governor, is because we need a governor that appoints people into the positions like Pat Allen finds himself in today, that believe the same way that I believe, which is in these individual rights and liberties, that respect, viruses and disease and wants to educate about it. But at the end of the day, understands that we're all Americans and we have the right to choose the ways in which we live our own individual lives.
Okay, thank you. A tough question, perhaps. What are your thoughts of mail-in voting, and how will you ensure voting integrity in Oregon?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it dawns on me that, we haven't really had very many Republicans get elected into office since mail-in voting, first started up. And I honestly don't think that there was a lot wrong with the way we used to do things. I remember I had 28 kids in my 8th grade class. Our little junior high was a polling station. So I remember my parents showing up and voting and seeing other kids as parents show up. And it was kind of this uniquely American experience. And so then I wanted to show up, right, and vote and participate in the process. And I think we get away from that on vote by mail. I also think that it opens up for fraud, and there's a lot of things that we can do to really rein in our current vote by mail system. I mean, one is motor voter. We literally register people to vote without even asking them if they want to be registered to vote or not. We need to be updating the voter rolls. I can't believe that we had people trying to collect signatures to get that on the ballot. Why would you need to do that? It should just be automatically happening. It's crazy that we're not updating these voter rolls. We had a really closely elected state house race out here. And when they're super close, what you end up doing is chasing down these provisional ballots. And what a provisional ballot is a ballot that the signature maybe didn't match up to what they had in the Secretary of State's office. So you track them down, you ask, is this your ballot? Did you vote? Yes or no? And you do that with all the Republicans, trying to get them to support your person. If you're a Republican, Democrat, you do that, Democrat. Well, I start there to go into the story of I'm knocking on these doors and I'm saying, hi, is, John Smith here? And they're going, oh, I mean, I've lived here for the last 6 years. John doesn't live here. And yet somehow John has voted out of the last 4 elections. There are problems in our electoral system, and we need to address those. I have a 7-point plan that's on our website. Please go to that goes on how to address our vote by mail system. One of the things that we're going to do in this campaign is we're going to call on all the county election offices to hold their vote totals back in the general election for 48 hours until after the election. Because I don't know about all of you, but I am sick and tired of going to bed at night with one result just to watch the people in Portland count the ballots and give us a completely different result the next morning. At the very least, to make people feel that there's more integrity in our election system, let's hold back the count. Let's hold it back for 48 hours. Let's not have all the rural conservative counties tell Portland what the vote count is to catch up to, and if the people of Portland have a problem with it, why?
Right. Kind of detail on that. Just today, I kid you not, I had a client who was telling me how his mother passed away years ago. He still receives her ballots from her house where the mail gets forwarded to him.
There you go.
From years ago. And that just goes to show that there are issues within the voter rolls. We have a couple of questions from people watching. And I also want to say thank you to Mackenzie for her efforts, because she's in the background. I can, as you said. And
She's giggling.
I know that she's organizing an event tomorrow.
Yes.
For the Gresham potential closures that they're discussing. And I just kind of want to know what your thoughts were with schools, talking about closing again and it just being all resurfacing.
It's horrible. I mean, it's just horrible. It's horrible as a parent. It's horrible as a mayor. As someone who believes in the future of this country, you think about how far behind our kids already are, from the last 2 years, and how much further behind, they're going to get from these closures. And, I don't know how many people all have different, we all have our different, situations in our houses. But, I feel like in our house, our kids kind of started to get back to feel normal. It started to just now start to feel normal again, from the social anxiety issues and going out to see different people and all that. It started to kind of feel normal again. And now they're going to go back to the closures and the mandates and just, put us right back to where we were. And then you think about all the other states around us whose kids are in school and how much behind those kids our kids are going to be in a country that's falling further and further behind on the international scene and education. And it's about time that we stop just thinking about the present and start worrying about our future, because eventually we don't like to think about this, you guys, but there's going to be a time in which we're not able to take care of ourselves anymore. And we're going to need these kids to be running this country. And we can't just be, pushing them down forever. We need to get them in schools. We need them just for their mental well-beings, but for their educational well-beings and for our country's future.
Yep. I secretly hope that one of these kids gets to take care of Kate Brown when Governor Brown when she's when she's older.
Right.
Really
She'll be like, why don't you understand this? Because of you.
All right, so I'm gonna put the questions up on the screen for you there, Stan. This is from Mike again, and then there's somebody behind him as well. And I'll put that up after you're done.
Red
Oh,
wave.
and Michelle, could you check your private chat, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity for a red wave throughout Oregon. You see what happened in Virginia. I'm more excited about, quite frankly, what happened in New Jersey, because New Jersey, we didn't even have our eyes on it. Very little investment was going on in New Jersey, and yet there were still huge Republican gains, and the legislature almost won the governorship. As I talked to the folks on the Senate side, they are very, very excited about, the opportunities that they have on the Senate side. I'm a little worried about where we're at on the House side. I'm worried that maybe we weren't focused enough on recruiting candidates and getting ready, that maybe we had our eyes on other things. But we need to be able to support those folks, because I think there's a really strong chance of a red wave that will be nationally, but here in Oregon, it would certainly help our agenda as governor. I believe strongly that we are not going to have these super majorities anymore of Democrats. We'll definitely beat back against that. But I think we have a real shot at Republican gains in the House. I'm at the Senate, and I'm extremely excited about the new leadership that's in the House side that's really starting to get the act together to be able to do good recruitment.
Thank you, Stan. The second question in there is very similar to that one, so I think that answered it. Do you have anything else you'd like to say that you want to share with anybody that we didn't touch on that you kind of want to put out there?
No, is that the bonus question? Was that the bonus? Do I get the bonus question?
If you want to answer it very quickly, I understand you're up against the time
I'll
slot
go really
here.
quick. Well, I got to know what this bonus question is.
You got what the bonus question is. Okay, so
Is it mine or yours, Michelle? I don't recall.
It's not mine. It's Matt's.
It's at the very bottom.
Oh, yeah, it's Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Kate Brown, through Executive Order 2004, has enacted, a climate agenda. Wanted to get your thoughts on that and see what your plans would be for that executive order.
Yeah, we immediately repeal it. It's an executive order, so as governor, I could easily, immediately repeal the executive order. I mentioned my folks are a small trucking company. My mom works in the office. My dad and my little brother drive the trucks, and it would just be, horrible for their small business and businesses like theirs around the state. You think about how small of an overall impact we have on the world's climate. Somehow Oregon's going to solve it on the backs of rural Oregonians. Unbelievable. All right. I know we're up against the time. Mackenzie, where is it? It's at noon tomorrow.
No, it's at 1 tomorrow at North Gresham Elementary School.
1 o'clock tomorrow, North Gresham Elementary School, a rally to ensure that our kids continue to be in the classroom. There's already emails going around of preparation for virtual hybrid learning type environments, and we need to really stand up as parents and let them know that is unacceptable.
All right. Well, I think that's it for tonight. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Stan.
And
Right,
I just have one
time.
more quick thing to add. I'm going to leave the space open for people who want to join us and discuss the views that Stan shared. I think I've got quite a few people in that space, and so that
in the Twitter space.
Yeah, in the Twitter space, that space will still stay open.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I didn't expect